Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Program's broadcast. I'm Dr. Brad Reedy. Today is Tuesday, April 25th, 23. Excuse me. Tonight, we're going to talk about how to find a therapist. And mostly what I'll be talking about is how to decide if the therapist that you've been referred is one that you want to keep going to. So that's really what we're talking about tonight. The most difficult thing about tonight's presentation is not the content, it's not talking about therapy, what good therapy is, how to recognize it, the kinds of questions to ask and to vet your therapist with, but really just the idea that part of finding a therapist that is a good fit actually takes some work. So there's I want to just acknowledge at the outset that the very act of being able to ask difficult questions, to be able to stand up for what you need in psychotherapy depends a little bit on your work and your base and your foundation already. I'll also say that I think you can have a therapist that works for you for a time and that can be effective. And this can be something that you change later on, right? The therapist that's fine for you in January of 2023 might not be the same therapist that works for you in January of 2025. So it's okay to move on. It's okay for a certain approach to kind of wear out its usefulness to you to be able to move on to it. I'll even talk about termination of therapy before we wrap up tonight. So um, I do have some slides with some quotes. This is one of those broadcasts that you might ask for the slides afterwards. If you ever want any of our slides, if you ever want to send in any questions, you can always email at webinar@evoketherapy.com. With that, let's get into the content for this evening. I'm going to start with this idea that first and foremost, I'm talking about psychotherapy from an attachment based therapy lens. There are a whole host of approaches and techniques to psychotherapy. But I think of attachment based therapy is that foundation, that glue, that sensibility that is under all of it. However, I've had many clients, I've had many friends, many people over the years that have found it valuable to use a certain approach, like EMDR, for example, and dealing with a specific trauma, and to help them move through it. Something that might not just be the kind of therapy that I do, and that's just fine. One of the things that I want to say first and foremost is you get to decide who the right therapist for you is. I don't get to decide that. However, I have to talk about this tonight. I've scheduled it on the calendar, and so I'm going to talk about it. So I'm going to talk about my approach. I'm going to talk about the way that I think about psychotherapy, the way that I think about my own therapy, the therapists that I train, our coaching staff, and also my own experience from sitting on the other side of the couch. I will say this, and I've said it many times, and I can't really overemphasize this. When I have new therapists that we either hire or interview or that reach out to me for one reason or another, the thing that I say is you can be a smart therapist. You can be a good enough therapist if you study hard enough. But I've never seen a gifted therapist who doesn't do their own work, who doesn't have that ingredient in their life, whatever that looks like. Somebody who's been to therapy, somebody who utilizes supervision, somebody who's in recovery, somebody who's been willing to look at themselves to understand that on a fundamental level, we're no different from our clients. I say this when I'm training therapists. If you fantasize, if you imagine that your clients are sicker than you are, you're only going to do harm to them. So part of this is, yes, a therapist or a leader, a mentor, a sponsor might be farther along on the journey, a few steps ahead of you on the journey. That's to be expected, that they've covered some of the ground that you're covering now, of course. But on a more basic level, we're all the same. We're all very similar on a very spiritual, psychological sense. We're equals, and we don't know how you need to live your life, the decisions you need to make. So, part of what I want to say tonight is if it works for you, it works for you. If it's something that you find gives you comfort, gives you peace, then it works for you. I'm pretty clear that, except for in rare exceptions, I get this question a lot. when parents are supporting, encouraging, even requiring their children to go to psychotherapy, they want to ask the question about, what if I don't think the therapist is doing a good job, or what if I think the therapist isn't supporting my approach, the way that I think about things. It would be for sure the exception that I would encourage you to step in, because part of the process is that the therapist is different than you. You know, when I think about psychotherapy, when I think about the transformative, fundamental energy in psychotherapy, it's about, I'm going to read some quotes that support this notion or this idea. It's about somebody who's different from your parents, somebody who has a different way of looking at the world. And so much of psychotherapy is getting in that different context. In other words, context is a conceptual word for getting into a room, a conversation with somebody who's different than your parents, who has a different mindset, a different approach, different feelings, different ideas. And it's from that vantage point that you can see your context more clearly. From that new context, we recognize that the life that we had, the childhood we had, the family that we had, was full of its own construct, its own ideas, and that they weren't necessarily the truth about the world. They were just one person's, or one parent's, one co-parenting set of the way that they looked at the world. No one, including me, can tell you which is the right therapist for you. So everything I say tonight, everything I say, you're welcome and invited to consider just throwing in the garbage can. However, like I said, I promised that I'd do this broadcast, so I'm going to do it. From the forward to the Audacity to Be You, my second book, Dr. Jamie Gill, who happens to be my therapist, wrote this. She said, a well-trained therapist is a person who is skilled in creating an environment that is safe and in which one can feel welcome. That is, the therapist is not like one's parents. The therapist listens. He or she doesn't simply dispense answers. So let's break this down a little bit. First and foremost, the most important thing for a therapist is to set up a place where you can be safe to be yourself. The way that I like to think about psychotherapy is, virtually, the client can't get it wrong. There's no one right way to do psychotherapy. Part of what I'm trying to create when I'm doing psychotherapy with people is a place where they get to share all of themselves, especially, particularly those parts that their family, that their parents, that their background told them were unacceptable, told them to be afraid of, or to be ashamed of, or to fix, or to change. Right? I want to welcome the what my therapist calls the horrible, rotten self, the subtitle of the Audacity to Be You, learning to love your horrible, rotten self. I want to welcome all parts of you, because there's great wisdom and energy that's important in those parts. And because we grow up in families, this is the fundamental nature of humanity. I can't state this too broadly. The human being learns and believes and is genetically wired, evolutionary, designed. We're designed by our evolution to make sure that the parent is not overwhelmed or exhausted or disgusted or despairing or too afraid. Because if the infant or the child, the young child, gets left, the infant or the young child will die. Of all of the species on Earth, we are the ones that need the care, supervision, and support of our parents longer than any other creature. There's great things about that in terms of our neurology. There's a long opportunity to prune and to grow, neurologically speaking. There's a great part of that design. And when something threatens, at the very core, if I've talked about this before, the infant seeing the frown on mother's face or father's face, the parent, doesn't interpret it as that this other person is mad at me or disappointed. They experience it as something is wrong with me. I am too much or too little, not enough, or the wrong way. So psychotherapy is a reversal of that idea, a repair of that idea. That's why as psychotherapists, we have to make space, which sometimes includes the fact that it might take months or years for a client to fully realize a part of themselves that they haven't been able to look at. And if you've done your own work as the psychotherapist, as the therapist, you know that it takes years. I just confessed something to my therapist about myself Friday. I've been seeing her for 24 years. It's not like I've never broached the subject at all, but something very clear, something very specific I was able to confess about myself. A fear and a shame that I felt about myself. And what I love about my therapist, about the experience that I've learned, is she's forever patient. Sometimes therapists who don't know what to do when the client doesn't seem to be doing what the therapist thinks is psychotherapy, working on a specific issue, that tells you something about them, that they don't quite understand the project, because it's not your agenda that matters. And sometimes it takes a very long time for a client to have the courage to ask for and to pursue what they need and what they want, because they have not been trained that way, not been parented that way. So therapy is a safe place, first and foremost. The therapist is not an expert on your life, but they have an expertise. The expertise of a good psychotherapist, is the way that I look at it, is that they are an expert at creating a context where you can discover your truth, not a place where you're going to sit and listen to the wisdom of the therapist and how to live life. A good enough therapist, an adequate therapist, those are my terms for somebody that does a good job. And the reason I use good enough or adequate is because so much of psychotherapy is getting out of the way of learning what not to say, to not give lectures, to not give answers, to not let one's own anxiety take over and try to fix something that the client needs to work out for themselves and that you don't know how it's going to go. So for an adequate therapist, somebody who's flexible, somebody who's willing to shift gears. There are times when I've had clients bring in a spouse or a child, and sometimes they feel anxious because they want to prepare me. Like, this week is going to be different. And my response is, it's your hour. It's your hour. And I can adjust. I can hold space. I can change goals. I remember one story somebody told me, that this young man wanted to go to was encouraged by his family, by his mother, by his partner, to go to therapy in his late 20s. And the therapist asked him, "What do you think about coming to therapy? How do you feel about it? What do you want to do in therapy?" And the young man said, "I want to be a director of movies, of TV." And the therapist said, "We can work on that. Absolutely." In wilderness therapy, that's one of the things I would say to the kids. They say, "I want to go home." And I said, "Let's work on going home." I'm fully willing to work with that agenda. I can help you figure out what it's going to take for you to go home and get back to your life. So part of it is you're willing to adjust. You're willing to take the client's agenda. Sometimes people come to therapy. Sometimes I come to therapy where there's not a lot of rich emotional material that week. Things are going okay. And again, that's a moment for the therapist to say, it's okay. You want to talk about movies? You want to talk about what you did over the weekend? I don't need you to show up and do a certain thing for me to feel valued, like I have a purpose. I shared the story before where I have a colleague who shared that he had a client come into session who only wanted to text, sit across from the therapist and text the session all the way through. And when the therapist opened this up for a group discussion, everybody had all kinds of clever answers. And of course, at the end of it, the therapist said, "I just decided to go with it." And around the seventh session, the client started talking to me. See, the therapist is different because the therapist doesn't need something from the client. The therapist isn't counting on the client to feed their ego, to fill their sense of meaning. I wrote an article for Psychology Today a few years ago where when therapists initiate the termination with a client, I'm not talking about somebody that's a bad fit or where the therapist doesn't feel safe. I'm not talking about that. Or if the therapist has a personal issue where it leads to termination, but where the therapist says something like, I think you're done. It's you've graduated. I think often what the therapist is saying, I don't know how to work with this anymore. I'm trained and designed to work with a specific, a specific slice of the pie of the human dilemma. And once we've accomplished that or we're not addressing that I'm at a loss. And the client feels ashamed when they get graduated. The therapist tries to frame it in terms of congratulations, you've graduated from therapy. But that's not the therapist's decision to make in this model, in the way that I talk about it. Because it's not my agenda. It's not my hour. My time has been compensated for. The beautiful thing about therapy, and this is not to be crass at all, the beautiful thing about psychotherapy is you pay for the hour as a client, and that's essentially all you owe the therapist. So as I start to talk this idea out, you start to see a theme, right? Therapy becomes the parent that you never had, the childhood you never had, where you and your needs got seen. The concern was to understand you, not to impose upon you some idea about the right way to live life. I've heard therapists talk about boundaries as an excuse for their rigidity. There are a whole host, as all of you probably know, there are a host of ways to use psychological concepts and tools in a weaponized form. And if you feel shame, if you feel judgment, if you feel rejection from a therapist, the idea is that you tell them about it. Now, we're terrified because we've been wired that you don't tell authority figures when they failed because we know how that has gone in the past, right? Because we've been raised by people who haven't worked out their own wounding, their own childhood trauma, their own generational trauma, their own narcissistic wounding. Because we've been raised around these people, the big people in our lives, we know it's not okay to tell them when we're dissatisfied with what they've done. But that's the magic moment in therapy. If there's nothing else you remember from this broadcast, it is this. And I talk about this and teach this all the time. The best way to find out if you have a good enough therapist is to tell them when you're upset, disappointed, hurt, angry, frustrated with something that they've said or done. And here's the secret to that moment. A well-trained therapist who's worked on themselves understand that that's the moment to be different. Not as a technique, but just to understand when a client comes to me and says, "Brad, I don't like what you said. I was hurt last week. I didn't like the way the session ended. I'm frustrated. I'm angry." I know how much courage that takes. I know that they're so accustomed to taking care of the fragile ego of the big people around them. And what it will look like in their past is defending, making the client or the child, in this case, the problem, right? Spinning it. So it doesn't stick on me. So I'm not the bad one. My inadequacy isn't going to be a subject for discussion. I'm going to give it back to you. You've misunderstood. You've misinterpreted. You have a thinking error. Your filter is broken. This comes from your background, right? I'm well equipped with those tools. You could ask my wife. I'm well equipped with those tools and how to weaponize them. But if I'm doing my job, my response to a client who confronts me, for lack of a better word, is to say, thank you so much. I'm so glad you're talking about this. And don't get me wrong, there's a feeling in my chest when a client confronts me that I failed. Right? Sometimes it's a fear response. I've let them down. But I've done enough work to understand that that's just my stuff. And I can talk about that with my therapist if I need to. But in this moment, I have a chance to change the experience, to create a reparative experience for the client. Thank you for telling me. I'm honored that you would say something like that to me, that you would take the risk and trust me enough to tell me. I can only guess at how it would have gone in your childhood if you had confronted your parents or the other big people around you. That's the moment. That's the secret. That's the way to know. Fundamentally, the therapist that's an adequate therapist is interested in understanding you, not diagnosing you or putting a label on you, but just understanding you. You know, when somebody says, "What about this narcissist?" or "What about this borderline personality disorder?" Of course, that's a shorthand for understanding the way that pain and trauma is expressed, a style of expressing itself, a style for the defenses. But as a psychotherapist, my work is to see the scared, hurt, insecure child. The manner of that the way that they express themselves, that's just an interesting that's just describing the armor, what it looks like. But deep underneath is where the gold is, finding them. I teach therapists, your job is to listen to a client and to find the story where everything that they're doing makes sense. That's the job. And if you can help them to tell that story, great. If they can't tell that story, you can tell them what you see. Ask them, invite them to try it on and see if it fits. If it doesn't fit and they throw it on the ground, throw it in the garbage, you move on. You drop it. You don't get excited and attached to your interpretations. They're patient. I've said this that my therapist, this is the essence of attachment theory. This is really important. Because my therapist has stood beside me, has sat beside me, has listened to me fumble through solutions and dilemmas in my life. When in retrospect, the answer was right in front of me. Because she's been so patient and sat with me, now I can sit with myself. Now, when I screw up, make a mistake, do something silly or stupid, instead of punishing myself and getting angry at myself because I've seen somebody sit with me, I'm more capable of saying, "You were scared." Listening to the part of me, often conceptualized as the inner child or the unconscious or the shadow. Sit with the part of me that is beneath the surface, that is asking for help, that is trying to express itself. So they're patient, they're humble, they apologize. If your therapist doesn't apologize to you in a matter of 6 months, I'm concerned about that because we make mistakes all the time. So a therapist who's done their work, who's capable, will say, I think my agenda was in the place. I think I was feeling some anxiety, or I think I was trying to protect you. I think I was trying to whatever it is. I had an agenda, and I'm sorry. Now, 9 times out of 10, the client will dismiss it because that's the way that it's gone in their past. They don't again, the big people are fragile. So they'll say it's no big deal or I didn't even notice it. That's okay. What you're trying to establish with your client is this idea that we're all human. We're all fallible. We all make mistakes. The defense, the symptom, those are virtually synonymous. The defense is a defense against who I am. Because who I am is not good enough. Who I am is not enough or too much. In some way or another, not lovable. Not worthy. So when you're able to say, I fumbled, I screwed up, I'm sorry, you're you're exposing the client to an experience of being human. You're modeling it. Same thing you do with a parent. There are tremendous parallels between good parenting and being a good therapist. Like I said, in essence, the therapist becomes the parent that you never had, and therapy becomes the childhood that you never had. Like I said, they meet you where you're at. One of the things I love about doing our intensives that some people, especially children who come with their families, are reluctant, are skeptical. They know how it's going to go. They're the identified patient. They're the one going to be on a hot seat. No matter what anybody says, it's them and they are the problem. And so when children come, or adults for that matter, come skeptical or distrusting, my response is, tell me about that. Tell me how you think this is going to go. Tell me what you distrust. I'm so glad that you would tell me that you're not trusting of the process. That's going to tell me about your life, about what it's like to be you, what it was like to be you growing up. I used to use, and I hear lots of programs, lots of therapists use this phrase, trust the process. But why? That seems ridiculous to trust the process. To just kind of, part of what I say is trusting the process is telling me you don't trust the process. If I really believe that, then when you share your skepticism with me, your distrust of me, of the process, my thought is, of course, you must have a good reason. And you just met me. Why would you expect that I'm going to be any different than everybody else? And if the therapist, and this is true for our wilderness therapist, if the therapist it colludes with the parents just to support the parents' fragile egos, right? To not bring the parents into the soup, the recipe, the healing, then the therapist isn't doing their job. So I tell parents, everybody's going to get a turn on the hot seat, so to speak. I'm going to try to make it as safe as possible, but we're going to look everywhere at everybody. That's actually the door to freedom for the child. The exact thing that you want. Some of you know that. Some of you know it very well. Having a therapist that's still learning, still reading, still enjoying learning from other people, getting supervision. Self-disclosure, I tend to disclose a lot because it's the story I have the most access to. And I go to therapy regularly, so I'm working on it myself. I don't share my story to ask for help. I don't share it when it's raw. I'm not sharing it needing anything. So you'll be comfortable with various levels of self-disclosure. But essentially, you want to feel the humanness of the therapist. My therapist taught me many years ago that from her vantage point, that the mistake that most therapists make is too much distance, too formal, too rigid, too professional. She has this story, a couple of stories she tells, where she said when she was young and working at a psychiatric hospital, she was trying to imagine, how can I tell the difference between the patients and the staff. Now, the point of that story, how can I tell the patients from the staff, tells you really all you need to know about the story, because she's saying there's virtually no difference. Just like she said to me a couple weeks ago when I was discussing a certain inquiry to our wilderness program, and I was describing a profile, and what I was describing, she said, it sounds like that person is, staving off becoming psychotic, barely hanging on. And I said to her, you can see that just from my brief description of this client. And I said, you've worked with people like this and you've seen it unfold this way? She said, yeah, I've worked with a lot of people like that. And even some of them were my clients and the patients. The point is that we're all crazy. That's the humility. That's the self-disclosure. When you're a new therapist, they train you not to answer questions about yourself. Like if the client asks you, do you go to therapy? You get trained to say, why is that important to you? And to make it about the client, right? To keep it at arm's length. I think one of the questions you ask the therapist is, do you go to therapy? And if they're unwilling to ask it or they don't, now if they've been like my therapist has been to decades worth of therapy and she doesn't go anymore and she's in her 80s, I feel differently about that, right? It doesn't have to be one way or all the time, but there's got to be a certain comfort level. If the therapist doesn't believe in the reparative and maintenance value of therapy, I'm just a little skeptical. If they want to keep you at arm's length and have these pat answers and pat responses that they teach you in graduate school, it's going to be a little bit hard for me to trust them. Your preferences, your ideas, your agendas, your requests are not simply marginalized as your issue. There are times when clients come to me, of course, and say, Brad, do you do EMDR? Do you do brain spotting? They might ask me about certain techniques, and my answer, of course, is to those, no, I don't do those things. I'm not trained, and that's not my approach. And there are people that swear by those, and that's wonderful. So I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about saying therapy is something we do together. Therapy is something we create together. I will tell you, I learn as much from my clients as anywhere. So many of the things that I write about, talk about, post about on social media, which is largely my social media is largely therapeutic ideas. So much of it comes from my sessions. Sometimes I'll jot down a note and say, I want to expand, I want to write about that and expand about that later. It's a teaching process. I'm learning. Clients have better ideas than I do. They have better solutions than I do. And how short-sighted or arrogant of me would be to assume that I know that they need to choose door number 1 versus door number 2. If they're struggling between door number 1 and door number 2, they must have good reason. I want to understand what they're up against. I want to understand them. I want to find their story. I talk about this in the journey of the heroic parent. My therapist's therapist was working with a client who grew up in rural Germany near a river. And in sessions, the client would vacillate between talking about current day issues and past issues. And at one point, the therapist made the comment that when the client launched into a story, the therapist said, "I knew that my client was talking about their childhood because I could smell the river near their childhood home." That's a kind of attunement that is poetic and profound and spiritual. It's our job to find you. The hardest part is you get to be a consumer. You get to ask tough questions, any question you want, and you deserve intelligent answers. You really do. It's so easy for us to regress. I talked about this, I think, the other night. I know I talked about it in my personal life. I went to see a doctor for a routine checkup last week, and I felt like a child again. I lost access to some psychological terms that I know every day of my life, some very basic terms, because I had regressed to a younger age, right? I'm sitting in front of this doctor, and he, in this case, is the authority figure, and I'm the child. I don't think a PhD or master's degree matters. I don't have a strong preference towards social work psychologists, marriage and family therapists, mental health counselor. I don't have lots of opinions about that. I've seen great ones in all of those with all of those backgrounds, and I've seen inadequate ones with all of those backgrounds. So I don't feel strongly about that. It's the way that they show up. It's how they treat and feel about me. It's how I feel about myself when I'm around them and when I leave. That's that's the mark, right? I teach our coaches and our therapists all the time. Therapy can be painful, it can be scary. We as clients, we grieve in therapy. We feel emotions that at other times we try to avoid. So therapy's hard. In wilderness therapy, the kids are invited to look at difficult things, things they've been running from. Those things are hard. But or however, The one thing that we can offer our clients is our presence. That you don't have to be alone in your pain, in your grief, in your sadness, in your anger, and in your fear. I will sit with you. I will relate to it as much as I can. I'll try to attune to it, to understand it as much as I can. Like I said, asking them if they're in supervision or if they go to therapy is an okay question. And if you don't like their answer, they might not be for you. It's hard to prevent or take away that regressive feeling because you're thinking this is the parent, this is the adult, this is the big person. But I'm here to tell you, you have a right to ask questions. They're supposed to be bigger than you psychologically, right? They're supposed to be able to contain what you bring, to hold what you bring. Is it their agenda or your agenda that's worked on in therapy? I am really skeptical when the therapist has a specific approach, specific agenda, specific way of treating symptoms in terms of, we're going to go through these steps. My experience is there's no generic solution. There's no generic technique. I'm a different therapist. We joke about this with my family because the therapist that I see have been seeing for 24 years. My wife has been seeing for 25 years. Same person. My adult children have seen her, and some of them still see her. And when we share stories about our interactions in therapy, it is like we all have different therapists. We've joked about writing a book called Five Therapists, when we're really describing the same therapist. But my therapy is different with Jamie than my wife because I'm different. Of course, that only makes sense. So do they have an approach that I remember I was sitting actually in a class post my graduate degree. And I remember one of the teacher was teaching this idea, this fundamental sensibility that I'm describing, this thing I'm calling attachment-based therapy. And one of the students, the graduate students getting their PhD, raised their hand and said, "Yes, but I am a cognitive behavioral therapist. So how does this apply to me?" And I remember thinking, that's not going to work. This applies. This is the ingredient in the therapeutic recipe that makes clients feel safe. And if you come with your models and ideas, your dogma to the client's going to feel that urge to please you, to take care of you. I love what the founder of brain spotting said, because he comes from an attachment model and a psychoanalysis model. He says if the therapist doesn't take into account that the client is inclined to try to please the therapist and make the therapist feel good about themselves, therapy won't progress. Right? I say to the kids all the time, especially in my first couple of sessions in the wilderness, I would say to them, I'm not your priest, your rabbi. I'm not your probation officer. I'm not your parent. I'm not your friend. I'm something different. And so when they try to complete all their assignments and please me, I kind of act disinterested. Not impressed for sure. I stay curious. And what they're telling me is this is what they expect an authority figure to want from them. And I want them. I want them. I don't want my version of a person, my version of a child. I don't have a lot of opinions about male or female, or non-binary for that matter. If you do, that's fantastic. I don't. I think that the transference relationship, and that is specifically the feelings that the client has toward the therapist, is largely more fundamental than gender. The fact that my medical doctor was a male is not relevant. I would have felt the same way with a female presenting in the same way. And that there's there's plenty of issues that I have to work out with all genders. But if it's important to you, 100% support of you. That goes back to like you get to decide. If you say I need a male therapist, I need a female therapist for reasons XYZ, my response is okay. I wanted to talk a little bit about individual versus family therapy, and I've said this before, but since I'm talking about finding a therapist, remember this: individual therapy is the foundation, like the foundation in a home. Couples therapy, marital therapy, family therapy, there are going to be long periods of time, especially in family therapy if you're the parent, where your needs are not going to be addressed or attended to. So if you're going to family therapy or couples therapy to take care of yourself, you're going to leave feeling a little bit starved, a little bit thirsty. Couples therapy, family therapy is more advanced. It's harder to facilitate as a therapist because if I'm working with a family of four, I can't attend to everybody's needs at the same time. Somebody who says something might trigger somebody else, and I can't. It's very difficult to figure out how to take care of both at the same time. I try, but it's difficult. So I say, if you go to family therapy and there's three of you, at best, you're going to get your needs attended to 33% of the time, at best. If you're a parent, probably less. If you're going to have your needs taken care of and attended to, go to individual therapy. If you go to couples or marital therapy, at best 50% of the time. It is my strong experience and belief that family therapy and couples therapy rests on the foundation of individual therapy, individual work, individual self-care. And that if you're going to family or couples therapy to feel good and to have your needs taken care of, it might not work. You'll have to take care of yourself somewhere else. And that's not a failing of the model. It's just an awareness. It's just laying the cards on the table. Some therapists will not see two people in the same family. I've talked about already in this broadcast that my therapist has seen multiple of us and has modeled good boundaries. I like seeing more than one person in the same family. If the family's okay with it, first and foremost, I'm comfortable. Like I said, there's a flexibility. You get to decide if the therapist is right for you or not. And my job as a therapist is when somebody comes in with goals is if I can help you get to where you need to go, which by the way is going to change. That's the thing, is that therapy will change. The false self brings the real self into therapy. What we think therapy is in the beginning, it becomes something different later. That's part of the evolution and the growth. That's part of the unlearning. And so much of what happens in psychotherapy is not about learning new things, but unlearning old things. That is by far the more common task in the work. Jamie Gill says again from The Audacity to Be You. What does a well-trained therapist look like? A well-trained therapist is an expert at listening. He or she wants to hear how you feel, not how you are supposed to feel. He or she will try to find you where you are. He or she will try to find how it feels to be you with your history, your dilemmas, your hopes and fears. If instead of trying to hear and find you, your therapist has the right answer for you, find another therapist. The right answer will be the therapist's answer and not your answer. This will likely duplicate the ways you were treated by your parents. And I'm not picking on parents. I am one 4 times over. But that's our blind spot. That's our kryptonite. I wrote in an article, if you want to look this up, I have a couple of links at the end that you can look at. But it's called Psychology versus Therapy. It was in a journal a few years back. And I wrote, therapy has become problem solving rather than a process of discovery of the self. The discovery of self is not fostered by offering advice or giving or answers, but rather by asking better questions. Gill refers to this advice giving form of therapy as abuse. And this is what she says. The therapist or guide we choose must not duplicate the wounds of the past. Thus, if the therapist or guide knows what is right for us and manipulates us to achieve these, quote, treatment goals, unquote, it is abuse, plain and simple. and it is hard to see how good abuse ever cures bad abuse. More from Gil. The experience of seeing one's base from a different perspective can be profound. One way this happens is by allowing ourselves to be honest and open with someone who does not react the way our parents did. For example, what was once very bad at home is now nothing. That moment, and again, if you're wondering about that, if that sounds strange, I'm going to read it again. One way this happens is by allowing ourselves to be honest and open with someone who does not react the way our parents did. For example, what was once very bad at home is now nothing. Look at the movie The Two Popes when the outgoing pope confessed to the incoming pope. Look at Les Miserables. Look at story after story of myth after myth, of epic tale after epic tale where the hero finally confesses who they are. Some horrible deed. And when the person responds with compassion and grace, grace is the antidote to shame. Grace is the thing that melts away the ice, the armor, the thing that keeps us separate. This difference, she goes on to say, in experience allows for the realizations that things could be different. One's assigned position in one's past is not necessarily one's assigned position in the universe. So again, rather than fixing you, they're trying to find you and your story. And what we're trying to create, what I'm trying to create, the way that I'm looking at psychotherapy today, our approach, is that we try to create a reparative experience for the attachment wound, the small t trauma. Gil writes, part of the business of psychotherapy is to discover and create alternate experiences for thoughts, feelings, attitudes, and beliefs. This is undertaken in the service of freeing people to be able to re-experience themselves in a safe but different context. The virtue of talking to an empathic and accepting person who has a different space is that it quickly illuminates one's own. What was automatic and unconscious is noticed and discussed. The world, I love this line, the world is allowed to become one of noticeable constructions. The fish is the last one often to discover water. And good therapists pride themselves on what they don't know and what they don't say. My therapist, just if you're interested, she did a podcast for the Joseph Campbell Foundation, the podcast with 1,000 faces. She just did an episode last week or a couple weeks ago. Jamie Gill is her name, and I think Bradley Olson is the other person on the podcast. And I was impressed by it, realizing that after listening, even though I knew her education and her training, I still, after listening to her, thought she's been dumbing it down for me all of these years. And I was so excited on Friday to tell her how inspired I was by it. And she just shook her head as I was complimenting her. And I said, Jamie, I think what I'm saying is I don't think anybody has a sense of how hard you've worked, how much you've studied and read and practiced to not know anything. I don't think people understand how hard it is to arrive at not knowing. It's profound. I'd recommend that episode to you if you're interested in listening from her, hearing her voice. Advice and directives, not so much. You know, if people ask for readings or tools, I'll do my best to provide something that I might think works. But since my work is trying to help them become themselves, sometimes the tools and the advice, especially the ones that are not solicited by them, not asked for by them, are my agenda, my idea, my right way, my answers. So I rarely give tools and assignments because tools can be mimicked. Like I said, they can be weaponized. Go talk to any psychotherapist in the world and you'll find the ones who are not doing their own work have found a way to weaponize the tools. Kids do it, parents do it, people do it. It's something deeper. The session content is yours. You get to decide. I don't decide what a good session is for my clients, what the right thing to talk about is. A session is a place where I like to think of it for myself as the client. I don't, it's the one place, the 1 hour a week where I can't fail. I could just be me. Calling people on their stuff, confronting clients, grossly overrated. I even read a marketing email recently where a therapeutic, a coaching company said, we don't sugarcoat things. There's no talent. First year graduate students can confront clients. When I'm feeling threatened or scared or insecure or guarded, I'll confront my wife. When I'm feeling grounded and safe and more whole, I listen. I understand. I show compassion. It's not about thinking that she or my client is not tough enough. It's understanding that the defense is a defense against a lack of safety, against a threat. Largely, it's about empathy and understanding and listening, less about talking and lecturing and teaching. What I'm doing with you right now is not psychotherapy, obviously. It has its value. Reading books have their value, but it's not psychotherapy. If the therapist becomes frustrated, angry, impatient, anxious, eager, annoyed, disapproving, shaming, labeling, focused on their model or agenda to the exclusion of yours, they've lost contact with you. There's something in their background that they haven't sorted out, or there's something diagnostic in that response that's worthy of exploration. If I feel hopeless with a client, I often realize this is how they must feel. If I feel frustrated with a client, I ask myself, I wonder if they're feeling frustrated with this process. And mostly countertransference, which is the therapist's feelings toward the client, the one that is nearly invisible, is an eagerness. In the article I wrote, Psychology versus Therapy, I talk about doing psychology on people and how the even newly trained therapists can confront people's defenses. I wrote, one could call the practice of applying terms, techniques, and theory without the recognition of the therapeutic process doing psychology. It may be evident in statements like, you're in denial or you're rationalizing. In their frustration and with overwhelming sense of impotence at their ability to make behavioral change, therapists may claim his mother has borderline personality disorder and her unwillingness to receive feedback is evidence of her resistance. These labels and assumptions often bespeak the clinical staff's frustration and may ultimately serve to ensure that the therapist does not encounter their own self, which may lie buried deep in the unconscious in order to preserve a sense of likability. While labels can be a shorthand for therapists to identify patterns of defenses in clients, they are often used to excuse the therapist from the equation. Alice Miller suggests the idea that therapists may cloak their disapproval and derision behind abstract terms like borderline, obsessive, regressive, regression, destructive. But unless they are willing to explore the 3-year-old girl or boy inside themselves, they may not see the parallel between these terms and garden variety contempt. When I see therapists talking about narcissists and borderlines in a derogatory tone, I would not go to them. I would not go to them because I have some of those issues. And they come out of my wounding. They come out of my trauma. And I don't want to be judged by them. One of the problems I have with some of the self-help people is they can be very judgmental. Some of the most popular self-help people in the world are rigid and confrontive and impatient. It's just because they've had no experience with this other way. The therapist creates a container. Their reactions are authentic. They come from the prefrontal cortex, not from the limbic system, the fight or flight, the emotional center. They're not reactive. They're honest. They're not reacting from fear. They're able to tolerate, to be patient with the other, to provide safety, to own their own reactions, and to seek consultation and supervision. I use my therapist for that regularly. Some weeks, that's what we do. I wrote, when you become frustrated or disappointed with a client, or other people for that matter, you've lost some contact with the other. If you could really see them and connect to them, then you would not be frustrated because you would understand them. Attachment theory tells us that a person's sense of well-being is the result of having a parent who provided an adequate container. An adequate container is the mind of the parent where the child experiences himself as welcomed and safe. If the parent was able to hold the child in her mind, that is, tolerate the child, then the child's experience is that they are okay. When the parent's limitations are expressed in disappointment, disgust, or anger, the child is likely to interpret these messages as, I am not okay. And in order to manage this feeling of dread that comes when my parent is upset, I will learn to put away those things that seem to be upsetting. A couple of more things I want to read before we wrap up for this evening. Speaking of the container, from the journey of the heroic parent, if they have no sense of their wounds or their limitations, they won't be able to provide an adequate container for the client to discover their own context. In other words, you have to know yourself. An effective container is a place where one feels safe to explore all the parts of themselves, free from judgments. In this way, the container is the mind of the therapist. And from the article that I wrote, therapy is not a place we go to listen to difficult things. This is important. Therapy is not a place we go to listen to difficult things. It's a place we go to share difficult things. One of the authors of this paper heard a therapist say to a client, I co-wrote this with my wife, by the way, if you came into a session and told me you were in love with a chicken, I would assume you would have a good reason. I would be curious. It is this kind of container that allows us to re-experience ourselves and rid ourselves of shame. And after shame subsides, we can see the wound of compassion with compassion and begin to heal. And lastly, J.D. Gill says this. I love this quote. Both cruel people and inadequate therapists are famous for a desire to destroy defenses without considering the consequences. We don't tear people's crutches away. We help them heal the leg. Crutches take a great amount of energy to use. If you've ever had to use crutches, they take work. So if we can heal the leg, heal the knee, heal the foot that the crutch is supporting, the person will likely get rid of the crutches. I wrote this just the other day. After my session, therapy is a sacred confessional, an altar where we lay down our armor. If you want to read more about this, you can go to drbradreedy.com and look at my blog. I wrote something called Climbing to the Mountaintop, Debunking the Myth of the Therapist Guru. Or you can look for the blog on Looking for a Therapist Who Looks for You. How to Discover the Real Self is another one I wrote. And of course, Psychology versus Therapy, the implications for practice and supervision of therapy and residential treatment and wilderness therapy programs. The take home is you get to decide. And it's not your job to train the therapists, to prop them up, to make them feel good. Find a therapist who looks for you, to understand you, and isn't anxious to fix you, which, by the way, will in a sort of sense fix you. You may ask tough questions, and you deserve intelligent answers. Do you feel yourself, especially in parenting therapy, that you're an object in the way of the child's progress and not your own person? It's very important in our program that our therapists treat the parents of the students that we treat with the same deference, with the same kindness and compassion and patience that they treat any client. How you feel matters and ought to be treated not merely as your issue. If you get upset with a therapist, they won't make it about your problems, your issues. It's okay to disagree with your therapist. It's important when you can to see if they can tolerate you sharing with them how you feel toward them. A good therapist can laugh at themselves, can be human, can apologize. And they don't need to be a good therapist, right? They've taken care of that somewhere else. They don't need to be seen by you as a good therapist. Their needs are taken care of in their own therapy, in their own place. And they're working through it just like you are. All right, folks. I'm going to go over the upcoming announcements. That's all for this evening. Thank you for joining me. You can turn your camera on your phone toward the QR code on the screen, which will take you to the respective webpage if you'd like to. My two books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be, are available on Amazon and Audible. If you want to come and do a deep dive, a springboard into your own work, I cannot think of a better investment in you and your child and your families, your marriage's health and well-being. Finding You is that offering. May 17th through 21st is the next in-person offering. just outside of Park City, Utah. We also have an online offering, which is half the time. It's over a weekend and about a third of the cost. You don't have to travel. So if time and money is an issue, the online offering offers a great benefit. We have Returning to You. For those of you who have been to a Finding You, if you want to come back, October 11th through 15th, you can come to Returning to You as often as you like. I'm going to be doing a Finding You weekend in the UK this June 23rd through 25th. There may be one spot left, and even you might get on the waiting list. Contact intensives at evoketherapy.com. We have custom Finding Connection for couples intensives and Finding Family for families. We have support groups for all of our wilderness families. Our next offering will be April 27th. That's in 2 days at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. Once a month, we have an alumni parent-only meeting. May 23rd at 6:30 p.m. is the next offering for that. And for our intensives alumni, we have one meeting a month, a support group a month. May 9th at 6 p.m. Mountain Time is the next offering. Contact Sarah D at evoketherapy.com for more information, or go to our website at evoketherapy.com/family involvement for more information. If you want a coach who's been trained in the model that I'm talking about tonight, our coaches have this training. We just did a training on this last night. This can be for parenting. This can be for couples, relationships, families, or just individual for your own support. You can do this virtually. We can match you up with one of our more than 40 coaches who have various experiences, some in residential and wilderness, and a wide variety of approaches on top of this attachment model, clarifying boundaries, reintegrating treatment after a child's stay in treatment, crisis and faith, spirituality, guilt and shame issues, LGBTQ plus support and guidance, a whole host of issues. Contact coaching at evoketherapy.com. We ask all current parents to attend 6 12-step support groups, any combination of Al-Anon.org, CODA.org, FamiliesAnonymous.org, or AdultChildren.org. You can also go to RefugeRecovery.org, which is a Buddhist-inspired recovery program, less of an emphasis on a higher power. Or you can go to the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI.org, and find free classes and resources in your area. All of these broadcasts are available on Spotify or your favorite podcast app. Just go to that podcast app and search Finding You, an Evoke Therapy podcast. Or you can go to soundcloud.com on your computer and listen and browse there. You can also find the rebroadcast of these episodes on our YouTube channel. Just go to Evoke Therapy's YouTube channel and subscribe there. You can find Evoke Therapy programs and me, Dr. Brad Reedy, on Twitter and Instagram, using the handles at Evoke Therapy and at Dr. Brad Reedy, respectively. You can also find Evoke Intensives on Instagram using the handle at Evoke Therapy Intensives. On Facebook, you can find us by searching Evoke Therapy Programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives. And of course, our blog has wonderful content each month. If you want to give back for people that can't afford therapy, if you felt touched or inspired by this work and you have something to give and you want to give back, our 3 charitable partners include ChooseMentalHealth.org, Sky'sTheLimitFund.org, and EvokeFamilyFoundation.org. You can earmark them for a specific population or profile, or even a specific program if you'd like to. All right, next week, I'm not going to be doing another broadcast this week. Next week will be a live Q&A May 2nd at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time, so you can send in questions in advance, in between episodes. You can always email us at webinar@evoketherapy.com. So next week on May 2nd is going to be a Q&A for family and friends. All right, folks, I hope this was a helpful point of contact for you. I hope it can make a difference. I hope it spoke to you. And for and in behalf of the people that love you and the people that you love, thank you for showing up to something like this and being willing to do your work. Have a great evening, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.